afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. I'm Dr. Lisa Coleman. I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation here at NYU, and that's OGI for short. I use she and her pronouns, and I hope that everyone is taking very good care out there. We're thrilled to welcome you to our Transformation Talk series, where we spotlight leaders to learn from their journeys and to gain knowledge about how to be agents working toward transformational change across our organizations. In OGI, we engage global diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity principles with an intersection on global internationalization, nimbleness, inclusivity, resilience, transformation, growth mindsets, design thinking, and adaptivity in all of our work. Transformation Talks is part of our NYU Be Together initiative focused on innovating, acting, and transforming together. And today we have the distinct honor to welcome Dean Sullivan Marks. Thanks for being here with us today. So excited to have you. I'm going to read your bio and then we'll just jump right into the conversation. So Dean Eileen Sullivan Marks is the Dean of New York University's Royer Myers College of Nursing and the Erling Perkins McGriff Professor of Nursing since 2012. She just this past week stepped down from her role as the president of the American Academy of Nursing, a position that she held from 2019 to 2021. Prior to NYU, Dr. Sullivan Marks had a distinguished career at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, where she was the Associate Dean for Practice and Community Affairs, where she created community partnerships and care for older adults and promotion of healthy activities entitled Healthy in Philadelphia. She is a distinguished nursing leader, educator, and clinician known for research and innovative practices in primary care, testing methods of payment for nurses, particularly with Medicaid and Medicare, and sustaining models of using advanced practice nurses locally and globally. She is also well known for developing health policy in community-based settings. With a strong belief in the integration of practice, research, education, and interdisciplinary work, Dean Sullivan Marks has built sustained models of team care, including private family practice, a program of all-inclusive care for elders called PACE, and from 75 persons to 525 persons in 5 years that saved the state of Pennsylvania 15 cents on the dollar in Medicaid funding and launched numerous older adult team programs in academic centers, as well as the Veterans Administration. Dr. Sullivan Marks has also been on numerous community planning and advisory boards, including the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Patient and Safety Board from 2009 to 2012. She was the first nurse to serve as the American Nurses Association representative to the American Medical Association Resource-Based Relative Value Update Committee and did so for 11 years. Demonstrating through research that nurse practitioner and physician work can be valued equally in the payment structure. Dean Sullivan Marks has been active in regional, state, and national policy. She has served as the chair of the Pennsylvania Commission on Senior Care Services in 2008, as a member of the Philadelphia Emergency Preparation Review Commission in 2006, and as an American Political Science Congressional Fellow and Senior Advisor to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services Offices of Medicare and Medicare Coordination in 2010. This was just after the passage of the Affordable Care Act. As part of this position, she worked to bring promising models of care to scale, such as the PACE programs, and she is the former member of the American Academy of Nursing's AAN Board of Directors and is currently an AAN Edge runner. Dr. Sullivan Marks is a fellow in both the New York Academy of Medicine and the Gerontology Society of America. Among her numerous rewards that she has received are the International Sigma Theta Tau Honor Society Best of Image Research Award in 1993 and its Excellence in Practice Award in 2011, the Spring Publishing Research Award, and the Doris Schwartz Gerontological Nursing Award, Research Award. She is also distinguished alumni of the University of Rochester School of Nursing. Let me wrap up by just saying a little bit about her background in that she began her nursing career in 1972 in Philadelphia and earned a BSN in 1976 from the University of Pennsylvania and an MS in 1980 from the University of Rochester School of Nursing as a family health nurse practitioner. She went on to receive her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing in 1995. And her practitioner career was exemplified by forging and sustaining primary care practices, which she has successfully and uniquely integrated into her academic research and teaching career. And on a personal note, it is a thrill to have her as a member of our leadership team here at NYU, and also to get to work with her on so many projects. Thank you for being such a terrific leader, which is not just outlined by your bio, but by all the work that you do every day, Eileen. So thank you. Let's just jump into it. So as I like to start with all of our guests that we're featuring as part of this Transformation Talk series. You're an accomplished, as we've already heard, and respected leader and change agent. And given your distinguished roles, right, during the course of your career, we know there's an ever-changing educational landscape. And particularly, we can think about what's happening in nursing. And so some of us are more aware of that than others, but you might want to talk a little bit about that. So given these challenges and opportunities, how do you define progress, success, transformation when you think about your leadership?
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And I also want to take a little personal privilege, not only to say it's wonderful working with you, but also we're having our conversation today on a day where we lost a major leader and someone who has shown an incredible leadership profile, and that's the former General Colin Powell, who passed today. And I just was struck by the fact that we're having this conversation today at the same time to reflect and think about his work. And, you know, so for me, how do I think about feeling like it's been successful? I think a couple of things. One is just looking always toward, have I grown something? And has it been new and different and innovative? And then has it sustained? So in my bio, I made sure that I put that word in there, sustain. I want to make sure that, for example, in the 1980s, when nurse practitioners were fairly new, particularly in the care of elders, and we called it gerontological nurse practitioner, there was hardly any of us around. But people were very interested in, well, what could you do to help? And maybe I should have you in my practice. And I was hired and started over the course of a decade about 4 or 5 nurse practitioner programs with geriatrics, and they sustained for decades, and some are still going on today. So that's one thing for me, that you make an impact and that's being sustained. It may not look exactly like what I thought it would look like, but it's growing and it's continuing to go on. And for me, I thought early on about how do you do that to sustain something. I grew up in a family that ran a small family business. It actually was a 24-hour diner in a steel mill town. That business is still running today. It was founded in 1953. And my parents, of course, who passed on in their 90s, are no longer running it. And it's not being run in the family, but the community, it's still there. It's still serving the community. So this idea of doing something and making it a part of the community and making it sustained was in my DNA, if you will, but something that you pick up from that. Another thing for me that is success is excellence. Is this work that you're doing excellent? If you're not aiming toward excellence, then why do it? For me, some people say, well, you go in and fix things. I don't see myself fixing things. I see myself growing toward excellence, taking something, making it better, and measuring that excellence and aiming in that direction. And another way that I think it's really important to know that you've been successful And in some ways, this is sustaining something, and that is the emerging leaders that are now moving forward. So whether it's a student, a mentee, a friend that you saw, that you worked with, or leaders that are emerging and doing things that I once did. You know, I always looked up to deans that when I was a student, or deans that I worked with through student councils or whatever. And now as I sit here in the dean role, I'm wanting to be sure that my mentees or the students in our school see themselves as potential senior faculty leaders or senior leaders in some aspect of healthcare. So, and particularly in nursing. And so I would say those are three things very important to me: excellence, sustaining growth, and seeing emerging leaders step into where they belong.
That's just so terrific. Thank you so much. And for so many people who are out there listening, a lot of them are emerging leaders. And so I think it's so important what you emphasized, particularly in terms of thinking about growth and sustainability. And we're glad it's in your DNA. And also, thank you for mentioning Colin Powell. It's absolutely true. A great servant for so many, to the country, and in terms of thinking about so many of the things that we're even talking about today. So thanks for reminding us. So I'm going to move to our second question, which is really to think about, the work that, we do in our office is really across all of the university campus fields, disciplines, and really thinking about this work about global diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and access. And so when you think about the development of global leaders in the nursing field, right, and in terms of healthcare and the medical fields, what are some of the core strengths that you see as part of growing into, right, even becoming such a magnificent dean as yourself? Yeah.
Thank you for that compliment. I think the nursing profession itself and how we develop ourselves as nurses and are taught to be nurses and hold that profession to profess has a lot to do with leadership. And there is inherent skills that we practice with patients and families, and there's inherent reflection and understandings, because nurses essentially have to be instruments, and you have to use yourself as a therapeutic instrument with a patient, with their family, with a health system, really. And so to be a good leader, you also have to use yourself as an instrument. You mentioned being a servant leader. And I think that is a natural way to be a leader for nurses who continue to develop that ability to be confident in who they are as a person and take that forward. In fact, we call it the personal way of knowing. You also, evidence and ethics and the environment and aesthetics, but you also know personally. And you have to be able to put that together. And that's what leaders have to do. And I think one of the more important things in being that instrument is you can't be an instrument without listening. So you have to be very, very open to listening as a leader. And that creates a vulnerability, because you're open, you're vulnerable. You know this, Lisa. You're open, you're vulnerable. And then you have to understand professionally how you manage that openness so that you can listen neutrally and then give back. And that takes a lifetime of work to do. It doesn't happen immediately, but I do see it in our students. And I see it, for example, at NYU when I work with the student council members over the last number of years that I've been here, that from the beginning of the academic year to the end, you see the sharpening of their ability to reckon with tough issues. And I think students today in universities, if you're in a leadership position, you're dealing with very complex situations that are global, that are universal, that are immediate. We would have the advantage years ago of things washing over us much more slowly than in the immediacy. So learning that listening and developing an ability to also be open, but yet not lose yourself in that. For me, my leadership, I think, has moved through a number of stages and is in different opportunities that come up. So I would define myself as a servant leader, but also as an authentic leader. And being both a servant leader and authentic leader more recently has enabled me to really be transformational as a leader. So now whatever I do, I seek it to be transformative. I was doing some of that work in the past, but more and more I have a larger lens and perspective, but also a larger world that I can impact. So you can't do global impact without understanding those steps, but you can do it in small steps as you move forward in small arenas and communities. So, doing a project where you change one little policy as a student in student council that is going to stick in those bylaws, down the road is an important thing to do. And I can remember when I was president of the student association at my nursing school, we still had to we had a dress code and how we had to dress. And this was, late 60s, early 70s. And so it didn't really comport with the world at the time. And we wrote a policy to allow us to actually wear jeans to class. It was transformative.
Right.
But doing that and being successful with that gave me a lot of confidence as to how to do that and move it forward and understand those steps. So I'm just valuing all the small things that people are doing or what they feel are small.
That's so important because sometimes we're looking for that big thing, that big innovate. When we say the word innovation, that big thing, it transforms the whole thing. So thank you for reminding us of the small steps that go along. And the second part that you talked about, which I think is also really important, is your growth as a leader, right? That it hasn't been like one day you woke up as one kind of leader and then you stayed that same kind of leader. So I think that's important for emerging leaders to know, right? And it goes back to what you emphasized in the first question, growth, and to some degree, right, learning as you go along. And I love that idea of the instruments. What did you say? The instruments of care. That's really, I think that's so important. And this. I think the world of nurses and the work that you all do. So thank you again. So let me go to the third question, which is. It's funny we started this. One of the things that I love about higher education is actually the fact that we get to work with emerging leaders, as you mentioned earlier, right, and get to see that process of change and the collaboration that occurs. And a friend of mine has this question where she asked, "What would your 8-year-old self think of yourself today?" And so that it's just because, and so for a lot of our emerging leaders, right, they're not 8, but even in their 20s, right, what would you think of yourself today? So I'll start with that question and then I'll move into our next question. So if you had your 20-year-old self or your 8-year-old self, whichever you want to choose, Eileen, what would they think of where you are today?
I think that 8-year-old or 10-year-old would be, yeah, that's what I thought you were going to do. I as a kid had a fair amount of confidence and a pretty supportive environment. A large family in a community of both a Catholic and a Quaker upbringing, both of those, which give you a vision of community, of in a sense of belonging. And so I understood that I had a fair amount of something to share and say. So I think maybe I wouldn't have said, oh, you're going to be in New York City, or you're going to be traveling to Dubai or something like that. But I think I knew that I wanted to be out in the world. I knew that. And so I was always looking to people who would be there. So I think that's where I would, and that's the gifts and the blessings that you have, that are just randomly given to you, and you use them. And I wouldn't say it was I didn't have a wealthy background. I had to find ways to support myself. Yes, we had this business, but diners don't make a lot of money. So you had to find your way and listen. So I think that is that's really important. But there were moments. One of the things that I knew I did as a kid is I was one of those people that made friends with everybody. And I had a lot of friends and a lot of circles of friends. And I think I still do. And as a leader, that's really important. And, there were kids who other people didn't want to be with, but I never saw it. I just never, it's like, okay, let's go play. And that's who I was. And maybe it's because I was in a big family. But anyway, I think that the 8-year-old self wouldn't have been terribly surprised, but would be good to know that, I did it.
Absolutely. And so tell us a little bit about some of the challenges. So you talked to us a little bit about the foundation, right? Some of the foundation that you have. So talk to us about some of the challenges that you had during the arc of your career. And then one or two, I don't, you can tell us, but things that you're the most proud of, right? Because as we think about our emerging leaders, right, we want them to think about the challenges too, so that they know how to think about navigation, but also, some of those successes.
Well, I mean, one of the challenges is that if you're a leader, you're always going to be going against the stream a little bit. You're always going to be a little bit different. And who's to say who the average person is? But I knew that by being different, I was a lot of times alone, or alone in my journey. I mean, I had friends, but alone in my journey. And there were times when I also would feel that I had to stand up for something. So as I said, if I had a lot of friends and something was going on, or you felt that there was a wrong, and this comes down to some of the Quaker upbringing, you stand up and say that, or you address it somehow. And that means that you have to develop courage. And so I think that risk taking are the challenges, and and maybe losing a friend, or people disregarding you, or mocking you, or dismissing you, I think is part of the ongoing process that we all experience. And so I think that's a challenge that we even find today. And you could put it into categories. You could say, that, because I was a woman, or because I was very, very tall at a young age. And so I'm tall now, but I was tall early. And that's, that's different, but I use that, in some ways as an instrument to my advantage. But it also means that you stand out. And when you stand out, rocks can hit you better. And so I think that literally.
Yeah. Literally.
So I think you have to, that's one of the big challenges, is understanding that part of the risk that you're taking as a person, but that the reward will follow, particularly if you're on a long path. And it doesn't mean I was always right. I think one of the things you bring up in this discussion is what what are some areas that you had to overcome? And one of them is I tend to be a bit bossy as a result of being whatever. And also because I pay attention to systems and people, I can see things pretty fast. And when I see things pretty fast, I can be good in command and control. But then I had to learn that not everyone is like with me, and I have to be patient and look at processes and build these processes and get there. And that's something that I matured into, I would say, by my mid 30s, 40s. I was much more aware of how I could use the process to get where I knew we were all going to get eventually. So what was the other part of your question?
Proud of. What are you most proud of? Something.
Oh, the most proud of, I think, and is that I have really worked hard to bring the profession of nursing to a point of being more valued in the healthcare system. Now, it's through, in the United States, our payment models, but helping nurses to understand that we need to be more present and more valued in the healthcare system through the mechanisms that you have at hand. I have people around the world who have used some of my work to also forge their work, whether it be in Europe or Japan or elsewhere. But I have been one of the unique people speaking to that issue, so that I'm very proud of getting legislation passed, with a whole group of people, in which we allowed nurse practitioners to bill independently for Medicare. And you may say that sounds like a small thing. No, it's a big thing. It's billions and billions of dollars. And it establishes that nurses are doing X leading to Y, which is an outcome, which means that you can sustain it because it's covered in the system. And right now, out of the pandemic, that same question is looming large for the disruption that has occurred in how nurses care in hospitals through the COVID pandemic. So much had to be reinvented and changed, but the way nurses are listed as employees in the healthcare in healthcare systems comes under room and board. So nurse practitioners can bill, but the average nurse is just listed a number of people under room and board. And when you have to reassign nurses for intensive care work versus palliative care work versus set up this new unit, it wreaked ravage on the way nurses are economically valued. So I'm most proud that I brought voice to that. And I had to say it a lot and talk about it a lot. But I did it in Congress. I did it in our professional groups, and then became a senior fellow at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, which really then keeps pushing that. There's more work to be done, but I think I'm most proud of getting that rolling.
I have to say, I'm really glad you talked about it, and I'm glad you talked about the importance of it. It's fantastic work. When we think about the profession of nursing, in particular, the differences in treatment, et cetera, across the healthcare profession. So I'm not a nurse, but I do want to say thank you for that tremendous work in that space, because it's just so important. And also thank you for answering the questions, of course, about things, of course, that you had to navigate. And I will say, in terms of the navigation, I know just for all the emerging leaders out there, we learn things later in our leadership and have to grow. So thanks for reminding us of that growth as well along the journey. So as you know, much research sort of talks about innovation and the relationship between innovation and, of course, global inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, and access, and this sort of corollary relationship, right? You need this sort of diversity and to get innovation, right? And so vice versa. And so if you think about your work, right, as the dean, and then of course, all the work that you've done in your professorship, as well as the former president of American Academy of Nursing, and we've heard a little bit already about innovation in your work. So tell us a little bit more about that. And then, and tell us a little bit more about that in relation to, in fact, something you were just sort of talking about, right? You were just talking about COVID. So we think about disruptions that COVID is just one. You and I have lived through the AIDS pandemic, right? So we know that disruptions will happen over and over again. They may be health crises, they may be real estate crises, right? But there are gonna be other disruptions. So talk to us a little bit about the role of innovation in your work as you think about the future.
Right. Yeah, one of the things, so innovation, as you heard me talk, was we've used different terms, inventiveness or imaginary exploration or whatever it might be. But innovation is something that I felt we needed to build into our School of Nursing when I arrived almost 10 years ago now, that it had grown really fast. Doing some new and different things, but it was ripe to just like pop and really take off, and it has. And so I started using language and building innovation into our budget, into our thinking, and then you came along, and I was like, there's got to be more of this throughout. But so I think some important things about innovation is you have to build in a vision. You got to understand it. You got to be clear about where you want this innovation to go, and you've got to be agile, as you've brought up. So I've put the innovation into our structure, and we had an early strategic plan. And some people don't like strategic plans, but in what we needed to do at our School of Nursing, we needed a strategic plan. And we have a community of several thousand people, and we all are working toward one goal: educating our students and developing our knowledge. And so I feel that we had to build innovation into our structure and get everyone on board with that. So we built it into our strategic plan, and our most recent one, I have to hold up props. So we have thinking big, belonging, innovation, and global. Gee, where did I get that, Lisa? And it's in our magazine, and it's everywhere. And everyone here in the School of Nursing adopted it just as big. They stopped doing the thinking big. Some people thought, well, we need to do, not think. And so they just call it big. And I hear it in the corridors. And so we were moving with innovation before COVID hit. And we also do risk exercises that we have to do. In any corporation, you have to have risk plans and all of this. But we built innovation into that. So we made sure that as we were moving to new spaces, a new building, we made sure that we would be innovative in the technology of how we delivered both clinical simulation learning and classroom. And we invested in that with help from donors, the university, and all of that. But that became a big priority. So that when COVID hit for the School of Nursing, our pivoting to online and clinical simulation, which we could do in person because the governor allowed nursing students to come back faster. We had that in place, and we just kept going. And so in some ways, people say you're resilient, but you prepared ahead of time with innovation. And we use design thinking as well as part of our innovation, our curriculum, which we're now using for health equity and social determinant of health teaching, to embed health equity learning and social determinants of health and social justice issues throughout our curriculum, not just take one course on it or not just have it as one lecture in a course, but put it through. And because we put design thinking in place with a grant from a foundation, we're now able to pivot right into that as we see coming out of the pandemic, that we have to address health equities. We've got to all be prepared for it. We have to address social justice issues and understand more about that. And we're presenting that, by the way, at a national meeting in a few weeks. And I think that that's what innovation means to me. It means always being on your toes to see an opportunity, but have something there ready to go. And if you think about it, that is exactly what the new vaccinations are for COVID. They were innovations that were put together 10 to 15 years ago so that when the gene sequence was identified for COVID-19, you just fit it in and boom, it came out. But it was that prior 10 to 15 years of work on messenger RNA to create a vaccine that would work better and differently, that allowed that innovation to happen.
That's absolutely right. Oh, thank you for that. And thank you for also emphasizing design thinking, because design thinking and goes back to some of your earlier points, which starts with listening and empathy, right? Yep. Before you start the process. So just so integrated. So thank you again.
It starts with empathy.
It starts with empathy, right? And then you can begin that process. So as you know, it underscores a lot of our work. So I can't believe we're at the end of this conversation. So it's just been so delightful. And so lastly, as we think about your leadership journey, I'm going to ask you basically two questions. Could you tell us something that maybe you wish you had known, or a piece of advice that you had gotten early in your career? And then the second question, which I will re-ask, but it's tell us something that sustains you, or something that gives you joy as you go through this, right? So the first one is something maybe you would have known, or a mentor you wish you'd had, or whatever that is. And then the second, of course, is the sustaining and joy, to go back to your words, sustain.
Well, I think one of the things I wish I had appreciated more is that everybody's not on the level. And there's a lot of things you don't know in a situation. And there's other agendas around that are happening when you're trying to do something and you aren't always aware of what they are. It's not any different than playing with middle school kids. It's you don't always know. And I wish I knew a little bit more about that, or at least how to be aware that that is happening. Like, what is it that I don't know? And I remember learning a lesson very early on that helped me tremendously. And I'll give credit to my former graduate dean at Rochester, Carol Anderson, who told us that where does most of the work happen with a meeting? Mm-hmm. And it's before the meeting.
Before the meeting, that's right.
It's not during the meeting. It's before the meeting. And I didn't know that at the time. And I went, oh, really? And because I would always walk into, but if you do it before the meeting, boy, then it just rolls out. It's like a script. It just rolls out. So that's a good tip. There's a lot of agendas, and you got to handle them before the meeting.
That's exactly right.
And when something's not quite going right, don't start blaming yourself for being a bad leader. It's probably there's some other agenda out there you don't know about. Go find out what that is. And so I think for me, play is very, very important. We have to, and when you say, oh, I want to have fun, fun may not be sitting at home at night watching a movie. Maybe you like that, but are you really playing, or are you just vegging? You really need to be intentional about play. And that sustains me. And, I learned that, being, in different ways, but I always had play sports or play whatever, but something that's playful. You could do something with art, or you could do something. You have to do something that takes you completely away from yourself and is just simply playing.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Remember to play, everyone. I think that's so important, and to be playful, right?
Playful,
right? Because that brings back that joy component. I cannot thank you enough for this conversation. I hope the rest of our audience has enjoyed it as much as I have. And We hope that you will continue to take very good care of yourselves out there. We hope that you will also continue to follow the Office of Global Inclusion for more transformative talks as part of our series, as well as updates, events, and programs and resources. And that if you have the opportunity, you'll partner with us in our efforts to advance institutional excellence, to go back to some of the language that Dean Sullivan Marks used. So thank you again. Again, please take good care, and we look forward to seeing you again. Be well.